Okay, this has to be the greatest and most fitting intro song to anything I have ever seen. Like seriously, whoever wrote this song, Freckles, is a musical genius.
All the memories I have are beautiful in my mind, but they don't feed the hunger deep inside my soul. And tonight I thought
You need the Katana Samurai sword.
sitting in my sorrow, and now I must wonder why. What did it really mean to you?
Hey guys, welcome to my full series review for Rurouni Kenshin. Rurouni Kenshin is a shonen battle manga written by Nobuhiro Watsuki, and it was serialized in the Weekly Shonen Jump from 1994 to 1999. Now this series has garnered quite the legacy. I'm sure most of you, even if you haven't read the series, have at least heard of Rurouni Kenshin. You know, this was just a huge series at the time of its serialization. You know, next to Dragon Ball, one of the most popular Shonen Jump manga of the 90s. And a lot of very successful mangaka actually started off working under Watsuki as an assistant, most notably Eiichiro Oda. So yeah, I knew all this stuff going in, and I was very excited to see what all the fuss was about. Our story takes place in the 11th year of Meiji. So this is a historical manga. It takes place in the 1800s. And this was an era where sword fighting was sort of fading into obscurity with the invention of firearms. So the story begins with Himura Kenshin, a Rurouni, or a wandering samurai, arrives in Tokyo only to learn that the legendary assassin, the Hitokiri Batosai, is on the loose. Now before the Meiji period started, this guy was like tough shit. He was an assassin going around just friggin' killing everyone. This guy was just completely horrible, and pretty much everyone is terrified of him. The only thing is that Kenshin is actually Batosai. You see, after the war, he decided to become a Rurouni, going around helping people to pretty much atone for all of the horrible crimes he committed. And he has since made a vow to never kill anyone ever again, and only use his sword for good. So he finds this impersonator, puts him in his place, doing so helping this young lady named Kaoru. Jesus Christ, I swear to God. I swear to God. Now, Kaoru is so thankful for his help, she offers to let him stay at her dojo, which has been facing some hard times recently. So they live together for a while, and eventually their squad grows a bit bigger. They bring on the student to the dojo, a young boy named Yahiko, and they also befriend another swordsman named Sanosuke. And eventually they get a doctor in Megumi. Things don't stay very peaceful, unfortunately, because you see, Kenshin used to be an assassin, and he has a lot of people from his past that he would rather never see again. And some of these people will stop at nothing to get their revenge on Hitokiri Batosai. So the first part of this series is kind of episodic. You know, we're introduced to all of these characters. They all have their own little mini story arcs, so we get to know them. It actually reminds me a lot of the beginning of One Piece. Just, you know, where all the main characters are introduced pretty fast and they all get their own mini arcs. It's really interesting reading this series after reading all of the other series that have been influenced by it, because you can really see where so many other ideas came from, and it's really cool. I also love how this is a historical manga, because a lot of the things or references actually happened in real life. It's really cool. Now, I've never been that into Japanese history, but Rurouni Kenshin makes it really interesting. After we get introduced to most of the main cast, the series starts moving into bigger arcs. We'll have more threatening villains, because honestly, for like the first half of the series, none of the villains are really that threatening. Because for the first part of the series, Kenshin is basically One Punch Man. So yeah, we get a few larger story arcs, and then it all wraps up nicely at 28 volumes, and honestly, I really enjoyed my time reading Rurouni Kenshin. Now, it's definitely not the best manga I have ever read. I respect it a lot for what it did with manga and how it influenced other series. And overall, I do think that this is a really enjoyable read. For the most part, all of these storylines are really interesting, and I'll talk about this more in the character section, but the character development is absolutely great. I think the characters and the fight scenes are the best parts of this series. Fight scenes really tie everything together, and they're just amazing. I'll talk more about them in art. And, you know, it's just super fast-paced, really enjoyable read. You can just sit down and plow through it. It's really great for binge reading. But like I said, it's not perfect. There were a few storylines that I thought were less interesting than others. Although generally the bigger story arcs are the most interesting ones, so I was thankful for that. And in my opinion, I think the quality of the story gets a lot better about halfway through. One thing though, and I'm going to be as general as I possibly can to avoid spoilers, but near the end of the story, something huge happens. Like in the final story arc, there is a massive event that occurs. It left me in shock, and it made me go like, God damn, Rurouni Kenshin has the biggest balls of any shonen manga I have read. Unfortunately though, very shortly after, that big event sort of gets undone. And this left me kind of conflicted because I understand why it happened. I think the story did a good job explaining it. But I also feel like that Watsuki may have gotten backlash for this decision and then tried to reverse it. Because the way he explains it in the story afterwards makes sense, but it also feels like it didn't need to happen. You could have just left it there. But I mean, this happened so long ago, it's really hard to say whether the story would have benefited from this or not. But it still just kind of annoyed me a little bit. Also, about halfway through the final arc, we get like another mini arc focusing on Sanosuke. Usually I'd be fine with this. I think Sanosuke is a great character, and I did actually really enjoy this mini story arc. But it's just weird that we got it like right in the middle of the final one. Like seriously, right before the big huge final confrontation, massive battle, gonna be awesome, everyone's hyped. It just takes a volume break to go do this other side story that really feels like it belonged more near the beginning of the series. It was still really enjoyable though, so I can't complain too much. So next up is characters, and first let's talk about Kenshin. Now, the thing that makes Kenshin so interesting is his backstory, because it is completely shrouded in mystery. Again, with the parallels, this reminds me a lot of Assassination Classroom. Here we have this character who seems pretty cool, but we have absolutely no idea who he really is and what he has done. We knew that he was an assassin, so we know that he's done some horrible things, but we don't really know the extent of those horrible things. And the only judgments we really have are what we see of him, which is just like a super kind, loving person. We're like, how are you guys the same people? And of course, when everything about his past is finally revealed, it is very, very satisfying and enjoyable. Also, holy shit. Other than that, Kenshin, you know, he's not the most interesting standout character I've ever seen, but I wouldn't write him off. He's still a really well-written character and a pretty good protagonist. The supporting characters are my favorite. You have Kaoru, who runs the dojo, and Megami. They both have the hots for Kenshin, and you know, it's pretty fun to see them fighting over him. Now that I think about it, the series was actually a lot funnier than I expected it to be. You have Sanosuke, who's sort of like the more rebellious guy. Then you have Yahiko. Now, Yahiko is a really, really interesting character. Because when he gets introduced, you know, he's a 10-year-old little annoying brat. And I'm like, oh god, one of these guys, I'm going to hate this guy so much. He's going to be annoying and loud, and I'm just going to want him to shut up. And yeah, for a while he is. It doesn't really get in the way of anything. He's just sort of a minor annoyance. But I was surprised at just how much character development he got, and how much it pays off. Because by the end, he ended up being one of my favorite characters somehow. It's really hard to do this for a 10-year-old kid. And by the end of the series, it is clear that he has changed drastically. Like, he's still a kid, but he's definitely gone through a lot of crap, and you can tell. There are a few other standout characters too. You have Misao. I thought her character was really, really enjoyable. She's probably the most optimistic character. I really liked how she could brighten up really shitty situations. She, of course, has the hots for Aoshi, who, goddamn, this guy. This guy is our anti-hero. Don't want to talk much about him, but yo, he's pretty badass. As for the villains, honestly, none of the villains really stood out to me that much. I mean, they were still good villains and their motivations made sense. They never felt like super crazy, and honestly, I think the second last villain was actually a lot better than the final villain, who I thought was just like, eh. I mean, I get it, but you know, But this is a shonen battle manga. Let's talk about the art and the fight scenes. Holy shit. In my opinion, this is where Kenshin shines the most, in its fight scenes. The art here is so good. It's not the most detailed, realistic art you'll ever see. It's very stylized. You know, got that super classic 90s anime look. But of course, because it's a manga, it holds up incredibly well. And the art is just amazing to look at. Seriously, there were some times where I just like stopped reading and just stared at the page and I'm like, someone drew that. Someone drew that. They drew this whole chapter in a week. And they did it for 5 years straight. Stuff like this just really makes you appreciate how dedicated manga artists are, because this stuff is not easy to do. Now, one of the coolest things I noticed about this art is actually the blood, which I don't say very often, but this is a very, very bloody series. Probably one of the most violent shonen series I've read. It seems like just like every friggin' punch, blood just goes flying everywhere. It's amazing. And the way it's drawn, it almost looks like he flicked the ink. You know how people do those abstract arts where they just like flick a paintbrush or something with paint on it and it like splats all over the place? That's what this blood looks like. It looks like he took the ink and just splatted it on the page. And it looks really, really cool. Now, there may have been other manga I've read that use this tactic, but now that I'm taking art courses in college, I'm really starting to notice these techniques. and it makes me appreciate it a lot more. So yeah, the art in this series is very detailed, very awesome. Overall, one of my favorite art styles in manga I've read so far. So those were my thoughts on Rurouni Kenshin, a very, very enjoyable shonen battle manga. Definitely one of the classics, and I give it my final score of 4 swords out of 5. If you're interested in reading Rurouni Kenshin, the entire series is in print and available from Viz Media in its 28 single volumes, as well as the glorious Vizbigs. All 9 of them, holy crap you guys. These things are amazing. I've said some great things about the Vizbigs before, but these are phenomenal. These massive pages just really make the art look even better. It's got some color pages in there that look amazing, and of course they're great value, so if you want to pick up Rurouni Kenshin, this is the way to go. Now of course there was the popular anime series that ran from 96 to 98. It had 95 episodes. Unfortunately, from what I understand, the final arc wasn't actually adapted into this anime because it ended before the manga did, which is a real shame because I would have loved to see some of those fight scenes animated. And they also have a bunch of live action crap, like literally every manga I review. So that about does it. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. You can leave your thoughts in the comments below. And I guess I'll see you guys in my next full series review that has been over a year in the making. Here we go.
Now the little pain sitting in my heart has